this is the fourth video, and as a recap, the first context was to copy somebody profitable. The second video was to copy somebody profitable that's a mess. And in the third video, I covered how we know whether they're a mess or not, right? So now we're building upon those specific contexts, which is quite awesome because you see how the opposite is wrong. Like in the first video, it's like copying somebody that's not profitable or not being profitable, and you see why that results in badness. And then, okay, we copy somebody that's profitable, and then if they're all put together and whatever, there's no room for improvement, and you can see how that results in badness, right? And it's like, you know, building very, very carefully. Right, so in the fourth video, we're gonna talk about the product frames. The product frames are also something that we might look out for to notice whether somebody is a mess or not. But it's quite obvious that they're not gonna do those. So I mean, this is so advanced that big brands do it, but regular dropshippers don't. So I am kind of like dismissing them from the start in a sense. They will not do this. So in a sense, they will be a mess here, for sure. And also there are other free frames which are very important, which probably they're going to be a mess as well. And that's why I didn't include in the other thing. So there's a bunch of ways in which there's room for improvement apart from how they were a mess in the other video. Right, so let's see. A product page is excellent as long as it communicates those particular frames. But there are other things which are called product frames. In a sense, what's a product, right? It's not like the mind processes a product as a series of contexts. So one context that helps to create a product in somebody's mind is this particular context, which is really important, which is our peers are buying it right now. They view it as important with certainty. Now, each of those elements are important, right? Which are our peers, right? So people are interested if the people that they associate with are buying something. They don't care about people that they don't associate with, right? So that's why our peers, it's an important concept, are buying it, as opposed to not buying it. So this is an influential context. And then right now, as opposed to last year, right? And also, they view it as important. This is another element. And with certainty, right? Because they could view it as important, but they might be uncertain of its importance, right? Okay, so this is one sentence that has a bunch of frames, but it's useful to say it this way instead of saying each one of those separately. So, right, separately from this, it helps the client basically feel like he or she is going to be respected, loved, appreciated, right, and all of those good things by their peers. Right? People don't care about how they are. I mean, they care actually they don't, because we all identify with other people as people. So in a sense, the only way we feel that we're being judged by others is this in the dimension that we feel like we're similar to them. But if we don't identify with them in a sense of, okay, so let's say they have other fashion tastes than us, and we say, okay, they're different in the category of fashion, and if they judge us based on our fashion, we don't care because we have identified that they're not in the same peer group category as us. We only care about how people that we identify that are in the same category group as us judge us, right? So that's why it's this concept of peers, because in a certain context, if somebody is not your peer, it doesn't really matter what they think. Okay. So you can imagine that the product is being formed into somebody's mind as they're seeing the page by those contextual elements, which are the peers are buying it right now, or it helps me get respected and loved and appreciated and, you know, one up over my peers, let's say. Right. Another important frame is that whether or not people view it as a product that's always been, you know, existing, they could have bought it last year or 2 years ago, right? And there's little incentive to make that change now, right? Because they're well, I don't really know how to explain it properly, but the distinction is that if there's a recent mechanism that they feel like, you know, is changing the game, so to say, it's changing the game, you know, it's like recent, it's a new launch or an anticipated state of change. Right, that's a frame, that's a particular frame, right? That's why people buy the new laptops or the new iPhones. That's a particular frame, right? Another powerful frame is, okay, let's say that something makes somebody powerful, respected by their peers, etc. But they feel bitter. They feel bitter, and they feel like, yes, I'm gonna dominate the market, but I don't really care about that. I mean, they do care, but they, in a sense, have another, David Mills calls it vector in their minds, or some sort of other thought process that makes them feel cynical or whatever, right? So the opposite of that would be it gives hope, enthusiasm. Okay. Right. Then another frame. It's made for you specifically. It's something, or it's definitely something made for you. You know how some products might feel like, oh my god, this is it's like it's been made for me, right? As opposed to feeling, oh, it's been made for everybody or for other people, and right? If it feels like it's made for somebody, then that's it's not like something that will guarantee the sale, but it's something in the favor of the context which makes the sale, right? Another context is that it's perfect for the season and culture that you're in. Right? The opposite leads to failure, and that's why the opposite of the opposite, which is this one, is a contextual element that we want to have in our favor. Okay. Then another product frame, is that the customer sees himself or herself using clearly in many circumstances, or let's say in important circumstances, and also getting awesome results. And then there's this is quite counterintuitive, and I don't know how David saw this, but I checked it and it's true. So if it has a personality behind it, sort of like there's that thing with Boom by Cindy Joseph, Ezra Firestone's Shopify store, or let's say Kylie Jenner's shop with makeup. Because they have a personality behind them, that thing acts in their favor, right? Nike with Cristiano Ronaldo, it has the personality behind it, right? Fashion stores with Brad Pitt and other celebrities. So that's an important frame. And also another important frame is if it has a place behind it. Right. And of course, there's the frame of longevity and reliability. Right? Now, you see how, in a sense, adding those contexts does not fully create a product in somebody's minds, right? But if you take any sort of product, if you take a phone, and you take that phone, and let's say that we take this recent mechanism that changes the game, right? So if Samsung releases a phone, and they make the camera better, and they make the memory better, and the processor better, whatever. Now we take the same phone and we add a recent mechanism that changes the game, right? Which is, let's say that they change from digital photography to analog photography with some sort of film, like from the past, which doesn't require resolution, right? Which in a sense captures everything perfectly. That changes the game in a way, because now you can have infinite resolution pictures, almost. Anyway, so now you can see the same phone, just by changing this contextual element, changes your perception of the product in a very significant way. Hope, enthusiasm. Take the same phone, and let's mix that phone with no hope and no enthusiasm, right? So it's like, yes, you're gonna still do the same things. You're gonna give calls, you're gonna stay on the internet, blah, blah, blah. But if the phone is framed in a way where you could, let's say, what's important, what gives hope to people? Let's say it gives hope to have beautiful pictures on Instagram, right? So if the phone is, the copywriting is such, and Apple does this, you've seen how they hammer on the fact that the selfies are much, much better. It gives hope to women to think that they're gonna have selfies that will give them so much more respect and admiration from other girls, and that is hope and enthusiasm, right? So you see how thinking foundationally about those frames reveals how the surface level copywriting has to be. Instead of, yeah, we're gonna write amazing descriptions, amazing copy. Well, that's not the point. The point is to think foundationally from what we want to transmit, which is those particular things, and from there, the copywriting. And copywriting is one element, right? There might be particular videos that are communicating this hope and enthusiasm, right? Or a particular GIF with a girl taking a picture, like, you know, the CyberShot technology that Sony had 15 years ago, maybe, where they could move the phone or whatever, the camera, as hard as they could, and it would take a perfect picture, right? Because all the digital cameras back then, you had to hold them still for like a few seconds, right? And you can imagine a GIF with a phone, and they would be using the CyberShot technology where they would be taking the picture instantly, right? Without holding it for 2 seconds, sort of like we have to hold the phone now. And that could be conveyed in a GIF. It doesn't need to be conveyed in copywriting, right? So this is what I'm saying. I'm saying that there are multiple ways to convey those things. So for example, right, reviews, having reviews versus not having reviews, right? That's surface layer, right? That's why some stores, even if they have reviews, even if they don't have reviews, they perform the same. That's because reviews are not foundational, right? Foundational is that their peers are buying it right now and they view it as important, right? So how can this be transmitted? Well, it could be transmitted with reviews, with everybody saying, yes, I bought it, or it could be transmitted by, well, close to that would be with pictures of happy customers, right? But in a sense, that's still reviews, right? Okay, so how can this be transmitted? Let's say there's a screenshot with Forbes article talking about the fact that the market has been buying this, and with some sort of graph showing how the sales for those particular MacBooks with the M1 processor have been selling a lot, like they were best sellers, right? So having that particular graph communicates the fact that their peers are buying it right now, so there shouldn't be reviews, as long as there's that element, and if it works, to convey this particular frame. And if there are also reviews, well, it's redundant to have both of them, right? And that's why people don't know what to do, because they don't think foundationally. And that's why Apple doesn't really have reviews on their site, because they communicate those frames in a different way, okay? So that's why I say that those things are improvements that almost everybody is missing on, okay? And those are certainly areas to improve upon something that's already working. And lastly, there are other frames that mess up with rationality, right? Rationality, as explained from a particular book, is when you are in a non-emotional state and you're measuring the options and properly analyzing pros and cons and all of that stuff, right? Which is sort of like a definition of rationality. So something that messes up with that sense of rationality is urgency, of course, scarcity, and what's called anchoring the price, right? Or pre-framing the price. So You know that if people see on the homepage that dresses or whatever cost thousands of dollars, and after that they see a product page with a dress that's 150, they're more likely to buy the 150 one than if they saw on the homepage a bunch of dresses and whatever that were priced at $40, right? And it's quite interesting, right? And I've noticed in shops, when you go to a particular shop, let's say you go to a Nike shop with sports things, it's like they designed the full context as to make your mind, as to pre-frame your mind that it's important to be an athlete, it's important to run, it's important to look this way, right? That's why they have pictures with the good shops at least, with celebrities and whatever, because the more time you spend in that shop, the more you're going into their world, so to say, like your mind is now influenced that it's important to wear those type of clothes and it's important to pay those type of prices. That's why their prices are quite, in a particular shop they might be high all over the place. In a particular shop they might be lower all over the place, right? Because if you're looking at the prices, you're kind of like feeling that it's normal that those things cost a certain way, right? Like if you go to a Max Mara or whatever Prada shop and you see high prices, it might be a shock initially because you come from a context where you've seen other shops that have lower prices, right? But if you spend time in Prada for like 20 minutes, your mind becomes the price becomes anchored in your mind, and now it's like a distortion of your rationality, and you feel like it's normal to pay huge amounts of money for a particular thing, and that's what shops do. And it's quite an interesting thing. So this is anchoring the price, right? If they couple it with scarcity, which means that this is the last in stock, and they put some urgency, which is the store is closing in whatever minutes, and if they put the fact that their peers are buying it right now, so you're seeing customers right and left buying, and if the shopkeeper is saying that it has some next level material, you see how context, right? Okay, now again, the competitor might not have those particular frames, and they might not have those particular frames, right? So the less they have, the more room for improvement there is. Right. Right. There is some other thing that I forgot. It should have been in the third video. So we want to another way the competitor is a mess, and this is huge. This is quite huge. So essentially, when people buy something, they buy the result of something, and they get that result through a vehicle, and the vehicle is the product concept, but also what I call the aspect of the product. Okay, so if somebody buys cosmetics, the result is that they don't want wrinkles, for example. The product concept, it could be a sort of like electronic device that fixes wrinkles, or it might be a cream. So two different product concepts. Okay, let's stick to a particular product concept. Let's say that it's a infrared device. Okay, so that's the product concept. Now the aspect of the product is, how small it is, how big it is, the color, how it looks like, and all of that thing. In a sense, the most important thing is the result, and then less important is the product concept, and then less important is the aspect of the product, right? So if we see somebody that's profitable with that sort of like with this situation, and we see on 1688 a particular product that's still a infrared device, but it's lighter, it's so it's cheaper to ship, it's cheaper, so the competitor is selling something that looks similar to something else, and it costs the competitor $20 to fulfill it. But for us, if we just change the aspect of the product to some other product, and it costs us $5 instead of 20, now we have essentially saved $15, and the competitor is stupid enough not to have done it because, and We've been that way like a bunch of times, right? So with the smartwatches, for example, the reason why the smartwatch worked, let's suppose, was because it was communicating certain results that people wanted, right? Which were heart rate monitoring and blah, blah, blah. The product concept was like a luxurious smartwatch. And then we were sticking with the particular aspect of the product that was $42. But we could have easily changed that smartwatch to a different aspect of the product, which we have done. But after, so first of all, it was after a while, and secondly, it was for another reason than the reason that I'm saying right now, right? So now with this information, we know that, you know, what we should have done is to see a similar aspect of the product that we could fulfill not for $42, but for $15. And for sure, there were some particular smartwatches, right? And we would have saved a lot of money that way. Not to mention that the competitors don't really know about 1688, and some of them buy from AliExpress, right? Or other more expensive sources than 1688 with an agent. So, so what I'm trying to say is that the competitor has to advertise a aspect of the product that's expensive, heavy, and looks bad, right? So, competitor to be a mess, he has to advertise an aspect that's ugly, expensive, and heavy. Plus, and very important, plus we have to find a better aspect of the product. And very important, that doesn't change the perceived value, okay? So if we have this, then we got another advantage in our favor on top of all of those other advantages. And the last one that I should have mentioned in the third video is that, in a sense, they don't communicate the result well enough. The communication of the result or the promise is called the marketing angle, right? Or the promise, or the overarching frame, or the vision, or the message behind the product, right? So all of those are the same thing, message behind the product. So imagine that somebody is throwing out a product and people have to guess what it's doing, right? So there are two things that are happening there. If people are left to their own devices, they will have the self-doubt that, okay, I think that I'm going to achieve this result, but if only the seller was to communicate that, it would have been so much better, because there was confirmation bias. They would get into a sort of like rapport with the seller, in which it felt like the seller is on their side, it's understanding them, it has the same value system, right? So communicating the vision allows the customer to have the certainty that the product is delivering the result that they think it delivers. And the second thing, why it's important to have an explicit big promise or whatever, is because it's the element that attracts attention, right? So if a competitor doesn't have this thing, it means that a bunch of people are leaving the page. Whereas if somebody had this thing, they would engage more people from the start. So if we see that the competitor doesn't have this, we know that they're missing on two elements. And that's awesome for us, because there's room for improvement. So, in a sense, I finished the improvements on the product page. And now we're going to go into Facebook. So just to recap, okay, so let's see. The first thing was to be profitable. The second thing was to pick somebody that's a mess. The third thing is the fact that they're a mess is with AOV, LTV, the fact they don't have those particular frames. And then I have continued with saying that for sure they won't have a bunch of those. So those are going to be improvement elements as well. Those particular frames would be improvement elements as well. This thing would be an improvement element that would minimize the COGS significantly, and also not having a marketing angle, right? So in a sense, we're now looking at being profitable despite not having everything here that's with red, which is a lot, right? It's a lot of room for improvement. It's a lot. And I think there's going to be two more videos, one about Facebook and one about infrastructure. But before that, just see how, like, in a sense, okay, so here's what's happening. In a sense, in order to be profitable, so profitable when? The profitable situation on the front end is when the selling price minus the COGS minus the Facebook CPP is more than 0, right? So that basically means that the selling price has to be higher than the COGS plus the CPP, right? So we want to, okay, let me rephrase this. The selling price has to be higher than the product cost plus shipping cost plus the cost per purchase is CPC multiplied by CR, right? So in a sense, what I've been saying is that marketing angle, product frames, or frames that distort reality, and the seller frames are things that are all about the conversion rate. So in a sense, I've addressed the fact that, oh, it's like 1 divided by this, right? So in a sense, we want to increase the conversion rate by making all of those improvements that the competitor hasn't made. Then we want to minimize the product cost and the shipping cost by doing this thing right here, which we want the competitor not to have done. And the last things that we have is the CPC and the selling price, which are gonna be in the next videos. Okay, so up until now you see that the situation that is profitable, we like took every single ingredient, we're taking one by one, and we're constructing contextually. So the reason why this is important to go contextually is that if a change in this thing doesn't influence anything else but this particular thing, so this makes the situation better, and this other things makes the situation better in a different way. So it's not like something is robbing from one another. It's like there's an improvement there and there's another improvement that stacks upon the other improvement, and it's all about stacking one improvement after the other, right? Instead of, oh, let's focus on the conversion rate and let's make 30 variants of the product page and let's see which works the best, right? The problem with that approach is that, okay, let me explain this. So let's say, for example, a company had a particular product page and they didn't understand the meta elements of the product page, which are those ones and those ones, right? So the first variant would have like a $30 cost per purchase, and the second variant would have a $20 cost per purchase, right? And they would use the second variant. The second variant might have had those frames here and not those frames. And the first variant might have had, you know, those frames and not those frames. So what they've done is they picked the version of the page that had more frames in their favor, where the frames in their favor were more important. But because they didn't take a foundational approach, they now have a product page with that lack certain frames that the other page had, right? So the best possible situation would have been to take the good frames that they had going on for them in the first page, and also to take the good frames that they had going on for them from the second page and combine all the correct frames and leave out the bad ones. And now they could potentially reach a $10 cost per purchase, right? But they will never reach a $10 cost per purchase because they don't have like this foundational approach. And when they test, they will take, even if they launch 1,000 different product pages, it's out of luck if they could combine all of those frames. And if they combined all of those frames and they saw a $10 cost per purchase, it would have taken them luck and 1,000 tests to achieve that point. Whereas this approach is very deliberate, and it takes a far shorter amount of time and resources to reach it than blind luck, right? So what was I saying? Yeah, I mean, It's not like test, 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 and split test, and a lot of split test, and right? It also has to do with, okay, what's important to split test, okay? And it's very important to have like a structure of what's important, right? Because maybe the competence aspect is taken care of, right? So it's not important to test five extra versions of how a page looks like it's competent, right? Because competence might be taken care of from the first or second version, right? And then it's time to focus on something else, like congruency, right? Maybe each versions of those lacks congruency or non-neediness, right? So it's important to know when something is when a particular bottleneck is being broken, and when it's important to focus on the next important thing, right? And not having like a perspective of what's important will result in prioritizing the wasteful elements, right? Okay, so we talked about the improvement in the product page and the improvement in the cogs, right? This is the end of this video.